There is very much a civilizational crisis across the entirety of the Western world. There is an inflation crisis bordering on the hyper, the supply chain crisis, the manufactured energy crisis, the emerging food crisis based on the cost of living crisis, and the horrific debasement of currencies over the past few years, as well as the de facto loss of control of national borders. There are catastrophic levels of debt and the increasing possibility of a widening war in Central Europe as well as in the Middle East as bellicose Western leaders ratchet up their saber rattling. Moreover, with a complete lack of faith in the political and media class, as well as the erosion in the belief of equal treatment under the law, coupled with the total weaponization of the dollar, which actually has been a feature of American empire for decades, but deployed with absolute ruthlessness in 2022 against Russia, well, it's actually now breaking the world dominance of the dollar. And all of these developments bode very ill for the body politic. And these cascading crises are forming a perfect storm that very much may have the ability to push society over the proverbial collective edge. And to this end, back in 2022, retired two-star General Paul Eaton warned of a possible military coup after the 2024 election if confusion is successfully sown among U.S. military members about who the commander-in-chief is. And all of these developments, well, they seem to fit very nicely into German thinker and philosopher of history Oswald Spengler's hypothesis about the life cycle of civilizations as presented in his book The Decline of the West, which was published in 1918. A thinker and a book I have spoken of in several videos before, actually. And what is the most significant takeaway from his treatise and is mirrored in the current events in the West midway through 2024 is that we may now be approaching the new age of a modern American Caesar. Hi everyone, just to let you know I have some old favorites as well as new t-shirt designs on sale right now. Link to find them is in the description and would like to thank you in advance as it really does help the channel, as for years now content like this has been put into an algorithmic black hole as well as being demonetized. So thanks again, as well as I'm pretty sure you'll find something you will like. The Washington Post, conveniently a couple of years back at the outset of the crisis in Ukraine, reported that for the first time the United States was added to a list of backsliding democracies by the Stockholm-based International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Other similar organizations have also reported that the United States' democratic institutions are eroding, and this would indicate and would seem that the warnings of General Eaton, as previously discussed, are not alarmist, but could be prophetic. And back to the Washington Post, it continued that a basic tenet of functioning democracies is that those who lose an election need to accept defeat. In that, election losers are willing to play by the rules if they believe they can win the next time around. The key to a strong democracy, wrote political scientist Adam Przezutsky, is a form of institutionalized uncertainty. As long as we cannot know who will win the next election, both sides have very good reasons to preserve the system that allows them to compete. Now, what should be understood is that all of this rests on the premise that elections are fair and that both sides see them as legitimate. Political scientist Pippa Norris has found that when the public loses faith in elections, citizens stop voting, turning instead to protesting and other forms of expression, and increasingly embrace other ways to change the political regime. And this seems to be happening, well, at least in my opinion, seems to be happening in the United States as we lead up to November. In that, the share of Americans willing to tolerate a coup increased from 28% in 2017 to an astonishing 40% in the most recent study in 2021. That's a 43% increase, and I would venture it's probably even higher in 2024. 54% of Republicans express tolerance toward a military takeover of the state compared to 31% of Democrats. Now, this is the stark contrast to the finding in 2017, in that the gap had only 2 percentage points at that time, with 31% of Republicans and 29% of Democrats agreeing. In 2021, 79% of Democrats reported that they trust elections, while just 27% of Republicans did. Now, why is this important? Well, it clearly demonstrates that the democratic processes in the United States are breaking down. And this is again evidenced by the continued unwillingness of half of the population to accept the outcome of elections since 2020 and even accept the outcomes as valid. Looking at it from both sides, while the extremists on the left who decry everything they object to be the resurgence of a mid-20th century political philosophy that shall not be named, well, they are terrorized by the idea of a complete overthrow of the current globalist order, while those on the center and on the right fear the quasi-Maoist regime currently taking shape in all actuality. What both sides should understand is that the rise of caesarism is a far more likely type of political evolution as we go forward, as it may be the only way to preserve our fractured, disunited, resentful, and increasingly tribalistic societies. According to Oswald Spengler, cultures mimic life forms and evolve as a kind of organism. He reckons that cultures, all high cultures that is, have a limited lifespan that begins with growth and momentum, and then of decline and extinction. It was his belief that the Western world is ending and that we are now living in the last season of the civilizational cycle, or the winter of our culture. And it is the insights of his work, as well as the indications that our own lying eyes observe every day, that are all around us. Well, it would be hard to argue that the Western world is indeed not showing all of the signs of decline that previous high civilizations that have come before it demonstrated in their winters. And this final stage, this winter, was and is characterized by many things. But for the purposes of this presentation, we will focus on caesarism, which is the final political form in the decline of a civilization. The model, or the concept, is modeled upon the regime of Julius Caesar, the first sole ruler of Rome and the man who destroyed its republic. Caesarism is a term used to describe the form of government that is usually characterized as being one that is ruled by a strong, pragmatic, and charismatic leader. What's more, it's usually precipitated by internal as well as external struggles, social turmoil, and other circumstances that make it thus that the body politic must be brought under control, and for even the pretense or semblance of unity to be preserved. And if these conditions are met, a Caesar will arise. While of course there are vast differences between the governing structures of ancient Rome and modern democracies, history may not repeat, but it does rhyme, and many have pointed out striking similarities over the past several years between our time and antiquity. During the Trump era, for example, the president himself, who was often called a danger to democracy by his detractors, well, he usually bypassed, for example, the gatekeepers in the legacy media and proclaimed his own message directly to the populace via rallies and on social media. But unlike Julius Caesar himself, knives on the Senate floor were not needed to silence the sitting president. That was effectively done by the so-called fortifying of the election and scrubbing him from the internet. It should also be pointed out that in contrast to a complete overthrow of a democratic system or of a monarchy even, with Caesarism, the institutions of a withering republic remain intact, and functionaries, being mandarins, bureaucrats, or whatever you want to call them, retain their titles. Also, the appearance of opposition remains, even if opposition is basically theater. And could anyone honestly at this point even suggest that our political discourse and those that enact our laws are anything but theater? And it should be said that the disgust with the political class has now become so entrenched and so thorough that the most recent polling data from January 2024, well, it puts the approval rating of the United States Congress at just 12%. And why do people have such disdain for the political class? Well, I think it's clear that the so-called democratic political systems in the West seem to be completely divorced from the same populace that they mean to govern. Moreover, the system now is showing all signs of decay. The growing and entrenched inequality, political corruption, a weaponized judiciary, institutions that are unnecessarily complex, ever-rising tax burdens that is a function on top of a debased monetary system, social degradation and migratory pressures from the outside on borders that don't even exist are all increasing. And all of this is coming at the same time that internally people are dividing themselves politically into increasingly hostile tribal groups that can agree on virtually anything, including reality. And this is just an aside, but I do believe that when we look back several years from now, we will note that the weaponization of the US dollar against Russia because of the war in Ukraine and the attending and cascading consequences of doing so will be one of the key turning points in the history of the American Republic. So then, when looking back at Spengler, and it's something to contemplate, well, Spengler's contempt and judgment of democracy, media, and money a century ago, well, it mirrors much of the population today that no longer have faith in the institutions of the state and no longer support the broken, money-driven, pseudo-democratic systems of government, or in reality, what they are. And that is an oligarchy that we now all live under. On these topics, I should say, Spengler had this to say. Democracy has become a weapon of the moneyed interests. It uses the media to create the illusion that there is consent from the governed. The press today is an army with carefully organized weapons. The journalists, its officers. The readers, its soldiers. The reader neither knows nor is supposed to know the purposes for which he is used and the role he is to play. The notion of democracy is often no different than living under a plutocracy or a government by wealthy elites. Now, those words were written a century ago, but do any of the issues brought up by Spengler, do any of them resonate with you today in 2024? I would say that whatever comes in November of this year and beyond, there are few signs that there are any brakes on this train, and that the polarization within society will only increase, as will the tribalization and all the other attending social and economic signs of decay, which will, in fact, further entrench. So in sum, maybe Spengler is right. Maybe civilizations are an evolving organism that have their date due stamped on them from the very beginning. And now we can look forward to either an ever steeper decline, or as it would seem across the Western world, people are now looking for more extreme political solutions to the problems they face. Perhaps it is in the form of regionalization, perhaps it's something else, but also perhaps it will be in caesarism. Only time will tell. So that's it. I'd like to say thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. If you like this video, please check to see that you're still subscribed, as YouTube has algorithmically shadow banned this channel into oblivion, as well as unsubscribed tens of thousands of people without their knowledge or consent. If you'd like to help support this channel, it'll be very much appreciated. Ways of doing so are in the description. Again, with that said, thanks, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.